We are moving on to our next panel, which is entitled Doubling Down on Repeat Players and Moving to Retention as a Focus to Making Money. We have a whole list of amazing speakers joining as part of that, and it will be moderated by Nick Murray of Carry First, who I think has just joined. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Rick. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Fabulous. We've got Amber, who's a giant duck, and yes, everybody else has joined in. So I will, I think that's everybody. Yes. So I will leave you to it. Again, if you do have any questions in the audience, please do drop them into the Q&A section. I'll ask them towards the end of the session. But for now, Nick, it's up to you.
Got it. Thanks. All right. So welcome everyone to our panel on doubling down on repeat players. So this is really about focusing on retention as a way of making money. So maybe deprioritizing some of your monetization mechanics. But we're going to find out from some experts. So let's do a brief round of introductions. I will kick things off. So I'm Nick. I'm currently working as head of games for Carry First and also doing freelance consulting. Kenshi, how about you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kenshi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of A Thinking Ape. We're a mobile free-to-play game studio located in Vancouver, Canada. We have 4 games. Our two best well-known games are Party in My Dorm, which is sort of a game set in a college atmosphere, and Kingdoms of Heckfire, which is a strategy / 4X game.
Very cool. Amber.
Hi, I'm Amber Cook, and I work for Roll20, which is a gaming platform for RPGs. It's a web-based platform, and I am their Director of Business Development.
Very cool. Mark, over to you.
Hey everybody, I'm Mark Robinson. I'm founder of Delta DNA. We're a player analytics and player management platform, so we think a lot about retention and monetization and the game economy. We were acquired by Unity 12 months ago, so now we're inside the Unity family.
Congrats. And lastly, Sid.
Hey everybody, I'm Sid Sharma. I'm the Director of Developer Relations and Partner Engineering at Agora.io. Agora offers real-time engagement APIs for gamers and game developers. So if you want to add voice, video chat, live streaming, check out the Agora platform.
Awesome. So thanks all for your intros. To kick things off, obviously you all come from quite different parts of the industry, so I'm hoping this makes for an interesting series of perspectives. So how in your businesses do you go about balancing retention and making money? Where do you start? I leave it open to anyone who wants to jump in first.
Maybe I'll start off then, because I think it's pretty clear that you can't have a successful game without having good retention. So when we're talking to our clients, basically in terms of using the platform or even in our consulting mode, we're thinking about how we can maximize retention through early retention, then mid, and then late, because that's the fundamentals of building a good game. And then once that is on its way, then you can start to think about monetization and balancing the economy. But it's from our point of view, it's retention first.
I would argue that the balance between retention and making money is a false dichotomy. And so when you're taking a look at any game that has terminally retained users, so call it the kind of games that we make, or any game that's non-super casual or non-hyper casual, you just have, your spenders have a much higher rate of retention than non-spenders in general. And, for us, we try to offer a product that's fun for people at all price points, including free. And because our games are community-based, you need that high proportion of, call it non-payers that don't spend. But we see those two metrics basically as two heads of the same coin, or sorry, two sides of the same coin. And, to give you an example, the more that we sort of focus on retention features in our games, what Mark alluded to, we also see the more that we do that, we see more monetization, but not in the ways that you might expect. And so take, for example, one of our games. It has the chance for catastrophic PvP. So it's kind of like EVE Online. Once in a while, you know, when you're fighting another player, you can lose everything. When you have that sort of risk element to the game, players form really strong social bonds with one another. And so they'll form clans, they'll form tribes. People really care about their group of friends online, and so they retain extremely well. But it also turns normally peaceful people or normally non-spending people into maybe high-level monetizers. And what I mean by that, because the game is tribal, you know, normally peaceful players will rise to defend their friends. You know, if someone that they really care about is attacked in this game that has potentially catastrophic PvP, they're going to enter into call it an arms race. And they're going to spend to even to just protect their clan. And so, yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying I think they both kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, you know, you're not going to monetize if you don't retain any users, right? You probably won't survive if you don't retain any users. And I think it's really just important when you start monetizing and how you start monetizing, right? It's really the journey of the gamer. They have to feel, you know, emotionally invested in the game. You know, like Kenshi was saying, you know, as they feel that bond to other gamers, to that game, then it's a natural kind of move into the monetization process, whether it's through ads or IAP, right? But really the key thing is not sacrificing the game experience for that monetization, right? You can't be serving ads every 30 seconds and you know, pop-ups for in-app purchases every 30 seconds, or else your gamers will leave, and that monetization dream is going to just remain a dream. So I think the biggest thing here is it's all a part of the journey. First, focus on retaining your customers and gamers, and eventually they will monetize as they feel, you know, tied to that game.
I agree with what Kenshi said. My system, our system at Roll20 is really different than the freemium apps that I've worked on before, because it started as a Kickstarter where people were just funding it, and it was sort of like a support this development model. And at some point they pivoted and sort of realized they were a business to consumer SaaS company. So about half of our revenue comes from subscriptions, and those subscriptions are held by typically players who are GMs for games or dungeon masters for games. And it's really important that we have that huge community. We hit 5 million users, I think, in February, and we've had an exponential growth because of COVID and everyone moving tabletop games online. But it's really important to have that large size community there, because otherwise the GMs don't have anybody to run games for. And we find that a lot of those people who have free subscriptions, they're those free accounts, it's easy for GMs to get them onto a web-based platform that they don't have to pay anything for. And they eventually end up buying either gift subscriptions for their GMs who are doing them a favor by running games, or things from our marketplace where there's art or sort of set up games already that they can gift to those friends of theirs that are running games for them. So it's pretty different than the apps that I've worked on before, but I totally agree that the community has to be there for the paying subscribers to be there.
Very cool. It's like you all agree on everything. This is going to be very easy. So just to kind of to change this slightly, or to rephrase the question slightly, does the balance of retention and monetization change at different points during a product's lifetime though? Like, have you had any experiences with pivoting a game, for example, more towards monetization at a later stage, for example?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that you always, as we were talking about, you always iterate through different areas of the game to optimize the performance. So, you know, for example, you know, you could be concerned about first conversion. Is that first in-app purchase too late? Are there ways of offering bundles and timing offers that will make sure that the first conversion isn't too late in the game, where you've got your hardcore players rather than people that are still, you know, learning about the game and warming up to the experience? The other dynamic that is thought a lot about in our sort of client community is the interaction between ads and in-app purchase as well. We are seeing ads being used as a solid retention mechanic. having the placement of ads put in good positions in the game, the rewarded video, giving something back to the players for their consumption of ads, and using more and more precise data to understand the appetite of players in terms of their consumption of ads versus the placement and delivery of those ads. So you can, as I think we're saying in the first round of answers, you iterate through different spaces in the game, maybe retention, session one retention, first conversion, repeat spend, ad strategy, and then you almost start again and go around the next optimization loop. And it's constant, not just before launch, but more and more after launch as well. These games can last for years now, so they demand constant attention.
Are these all ads that are third party that you're running? Do any of you run ads for your own content?
I'm talking specifically about ad network and ad placement via the networks, but the concept of house ads and cross promotion is equally valid. A lot of work going into now predicting players that are likely to churn and trying to keep them in the portfolio by surfacing house ads. What's the next best recommendation for games within your portfolio? Which is a great idea because you get more bang for your buck in terms of your acquisition budgets.
Yeah, our mid-tier subscription level basically just gets you away from ads, but our free subscription level is usually pointing you to marketplace content. So not our subs, but our just different IPs you can invest in, because one of the strategies we have is that when people are, once they've got all these games that they've bought into, once they have access to all this content on the marketplace, they're not really going to want to leave the platform. And it's not like we want to trick them into staying, but once you're heavily invested, you're bringing more people in.
Exactly, and it's almost like what Kenshi was referring to at the start, that you can see real commitment and retention and monetization from the same cohort of players. People that are in the game every day, day in, day out, are going to retain and are going to monetize. We also see that people that are heavy consumers of ads are also more likely to spend. So part of the thinking is how to even out the economy from the extremes, and how we can get a contribution to the economy from more of the player base than just the top end guys.
Cool. Sid, Kenshi, anything to add?
I think the others covered it quite well. I really think it's also dependent on your runway, right? When you're a new game, you have to kind of make that trade-off sometimes. I know in the previous question I said, you don't want to sacrifice your game experience for for strategically monetizing, but sometimes you have to. So finding the right way for your audience, whether that's through the social layer, or whether that's through in-app purchases, or whether that's through advertisement, right? I think it's really important for every single game developer to realize how far out is the runway, how far can you afford to really not monetize off your users, and just do it based on your product's timeline.
Yeah, I think it was covered pretty well. I think maybe the only broad stroke I'd paint here, and this is different for, I think, maybe different genres of games, is that the more a game ages, the more you might shift towards monetization and keeping your engaged users, as opposed to the retention of new users. And this is something that comes into play when we have a game like Party in My Dorm, which is now approaching its 11th year of operations.
I think it's also really dependent on how your launch goes, because some of the launches that I've been involved in for freemium apps, we really had to do a lot of user acquisition up front. And then some of them have just had a really good organic start. And so we didn't have to do so much user acquisition up front. And each of those situations has then caused us to pivot, whether we were doing UA up front and then had more natural growth after that initial push, and pivoted like the ratio of spend we're asking for. And then in my current instance, we had a lot of organic growth up front, and now 7 years deep into the company, we're finally doing user acquisition for the first time, and reconsidering all of the ways in which we have leveled out those subscription tiers and asked people to monetize.
Right, and I would say, to add on to that, I think the way that we kind of look at it in terms of a balance of monetization and retention, especially around a game's launch, is we look at return on ad spend. And so we look at our ROAS curves, and I think that's a really great balance of, you won't have great return on ad spend without both good monetization and good retention. And when you perform, call it sensitivity analysis on your model, you can see how they will affect your return on ad spend. And the better your ROAS, the more you can spend on user acquisition.
Well, and I think also how in my experience, like I went to a talk at GDC once, and this guy it was like I don't remember who gave it, but it was how to not lose your shirt while you're launching a freemium app. And he was doing it organically. He was starting from scratch. He had some amount of seed money, but needed to be really careful with that budget. Where I've worked on a lot of apps where there's investors behind them and it's affiliated with an IP. So there's a certain amount of money that we expect to dump, and we're comfortable working at a loss for some period of time. And I think those approaches are just so different too in the freemium app space.
Okay, so when it comes to like changing mechanics, I mean, all of you kind of referenced the fact that there is a lot of iteration around needing to like start a cycle of improving, all these different areas of like D1 retention. What's your first session point? What's your first conversion? How do you promote repeat spend? So with that in mind, like how can you change that over a longer period of time when you think about, sorry, let me rephrase. How can you think about that in the context of like ad monetization versus IAP monetization? So would you say that there is a shift from one to another over the course of a game's lifetime? And also, does IAP monetization create like a stronger bond with the game?
Yeah, I certainly think IAP is definitely kind of, you're more invested in the game when you are purchasing in-app purchases, right? Like whether it's assets, whether it's whatever type of in-app purchases your game supports, you definitely feel committed to that game once you purchase that and are likely to come back, right? Obviously at Agora, what we see is that social component is really the key driver for retention, right? With the Play Together Apart campaign we saw, and I'm sure App Annie folks can speak to this, I think, we saw a huge increase in terms of the type of games that are enabled with voice and video chat, because it creates a sense of a community, right? And those games ended up being one of the highest download, highest, session times, highest revenue coming from those in-app purchases, because you can add on top of that community social layer, right? With face filters, voice changers, whatever it is, you can create new ways to monetize off that. So I think really the key to success, especially in multiplayer games, is really that social and communication component longer term to keep your audience engaged.
Yeah, I would say in the same vein, players who have spent money, they want to stick around to get value out of it. And that's how it seems to be a pretty hard rule in our games. And ads don't sort of carry that same feeling of, needing to rationalize my investment. They can help, but I would say it depends on the placement. So, ad monetization doesn't really do much for bonding in our experience when the placement is the kind of placement the player can't control. But I think, alluding to what Mark, I believe it was Mark that mentioned it earlier, it is strong when the player can control it. So, if your game is very social but doesn't have enough gameplay to keep players busy, the whole time that they're chatting, they can run an ad. And we see this in Party in My Dorm, where paradoxically, we actually consider it more of a retention feature, because it gives something, or it gives the players something to do when they run out of content but still want to chat and hang out.
I think this is the fascinating part of the economy now, that we've seen a lot of evidence that the industry is moving past the sort of spender versus non-spender approach, and it's a bit more sophisticated than that. So we saw evidence in our client base that, and this is going back 3-4 years maybe, that publishers, developers were pretty cautious on ads. they would wait and understand the player experience, and then either have a one-size-fits-all approach, or be pretty cautious in terms of the number of impressions from the game. Now, actually, what we've seen is that analytics is getting applied to the ad part of the economy equally as to the in-app purchase part of the economy. And we're seeing a lot more of blending of these two parts of the economy, so that for particular players of segments that are engaged, ads is a great precursor to give them gifts, reward them for consumption of ads that warm them up to what it's like to have a purchasing experience, to make that purchase in the store. And we've gathered evidence from across the Delta DNA database that there's a 3 to 5x in terms of the likelihood to spend when you see players consuming ads, even from fairly early on in the game. So it does give you signals about players' intentions. If you can, as Kenshi was saying, if you can be sort of player responsive to ads, you got to get the balance right. You can't overwhelm players with ads. You got to get the appetite versus the consumption, and the placement really well thought out. It's another game mechanic in our view that you can use as part of the design.
Got it. So if you were to use ads for retention purposes primarily, then surely there is a risk within the economy, right? Because you want to give something that is simultaneously valuable and yet something that doesn't deter people from making an in-app purchase. So how do you try and get that balance right?
The only thing I could maybe suggest there is, because I actually believe every game is different, and that balance across even our own portfolio is very different. So the only way that you're going to do that is, call it the lead of a game, is to build a growth model for your game that takes into account sensitivity analysis. For brief primer, sensitivity analysis basically lets you try to model all the input variables, and you can see sort of the relationships between those variables, or visualize them easier, and you can see how things will change. It's almost like a what-if / simulation for your game. And only people who are deeply familiar with their game and who have built that sort of model will understand the appropriate balance for that specific game. But in general, I think it's really, I think there are a lot of things that people say you can do to sort of balance it and make sure that ads don't cannibalize IAP purchases. But I found a lot of the advice, or even a lot of the common advice, can be detrimental depending on the context of the game.
Got it. So you wouldn't, for example, just say everybody should cap their ads at 5 per player per day. It's very much dependent on the game experience.
Yeah, it's got to be player centric, I think, is what we're saying. But Nick, you're hitting on a really difficult balancing act here, because obviously if you're too aggressive in terms of rewarding, you can impact on the purchase economy. And the answer to that is just to figure out what you're giving away, and do A/B testing, and make sure that you're going through those iterations to really understand the impact on the rest of the economy. Because like whack-a-mole, you fix one problem and you've got potential to cause a problem elsewhere in the game.
And that's actually killed the game for us before. I think in general, free-to-play mobile has developed a reputation for some predatory practices with respect to monetization. But I think what was alluded to earlier is that the industry, for the most part, has kind of moved past that. And they've tried to be more focused on the players and be more specific to the players. But, so when we look at retention versus monetization, it's actually, when we've done things to be more generous, we've flooded the economy with currency. When you flood the economy with currency, it develops this insidious problem that you don't see surface until, we'll call it 6 or 7 months later. And by then, the value prop of all of your purchases has changed, because all the players are getting so much currency for free, and then so they spend less, and it's a downward cycle, and really, really hard to it's really, really hard to fix unless you're monitoring the economy in aggregate for like very, very closely. And effectively, it's if you're not monitoring your taps and sinks, then you get into a situation where the balance between retention and monetization may mean the life or death of a game. And we've actually had to cancel. We actually had to sunset one of our old games called Smash Monsters because we weren't intentional enough about that sort of balance.
Got it.
Yeah, that also impacts within in-app purchase as well, because if you run a big promotion, it does have, that is a bunch of money coming in for a one-time offer, but it does impact on the economy. There is a legacy to that that's seen over the next few days and weeks in terms of people curtailing their spend. So there is a natural cadence for different segments of players to have the enthusiasm, the appetite to spend, and understanding that cadence in terms of their achievements, momentum, progress through the game is really quite important in deciding what the CRM strategy should be, the offer strategy.
Got it. I actually, I have more questions of my own, but I'm also getting questions from the chat. And actually one that fits in nicely to this is, players are very diverse. Are you starting to use machine learning to offer player personalization to increase retention and monetization? For instance, personalized difficulty, ad display, etc.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. The answer is yes, but it is difficult given how much data there is. So yeah, and specifically, we've tried to do machine learning around, and we continue to try to do machine learning around, call it our offerings in the store. There's a little bit of difficulty there. Like, not only do you have to make sure that the value prop remains the same, and you have to keep in mind the wider aggregate economy impact by being too generous versus not generous enough. But even for a game like ours that has millions of players, the data, if you have millions of players and call it 2 to 5% of your players monetize, the number of monetization events that you're getting really isn't a lot of data for a machine learning model. And so it's been a struggle for us, but we are trying.
If you, Amber, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I just was going to say I haven't had any experience doing that yet. It's something we're looking into, but yeah, we haven't gotten that far advanced in any of the freemium apps I've worked on. And with the current business model that we have for the platform, it doesn't totally make sense yet, but we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, my point of view on this is that we're kind of on a journey here. So we started with a one-size-fits-all mentality to games, and over the years we've created this sort of we're on our way towards individually responsive games. We were able to understand the players' competency, momentum, what features they like, what features they don't like. So the industry is using data to get better at making those judgment calls. And absolutely, machine learning has got a part to play. At Unity here, we have done a lot of investment in machine learning, and we're starting to see really good outcomes from solving problems like what version of the tutorial should we give players, because we've got novice players and expert players in the same game, and calling the shots in session 1 and session 2 about what type of people we've got and giving them that more appropriate experience as soon as we can in their game playing experience is something that we've seen great success with machine learning and our game tune product. And the thing that I think about in terms of machine learning is that it's not just pressing the button and it solves all the problems. You actually have to build up the experience and the expertise to understand where you should point machine learning at to get good impact and good results. So it is a great tool in the toolkit, but it's not the answer to all of our challenges in building and managing games.
Cool. Okay, so last question from my side, and then we'll jump to the Q&A. So just a couple of good examples, like 1 to 2 ideally from each of you, about like what you have found as like the strongest retaining features for your product. Like, how have you managed to make sure that those repeat players do come back?
Yeah, I can speak in perspective as as our company is like the technology provider, right? Not really the end user customer server, really. But I think, again, going back to the social aspect of things, right? The way to retain users is really, especially in multiplayer games, you not just the voice and video, right? That's the baseline. I think that's a must to have, but having other features on top of that, right? Like face filters that match your personal avatar, or seeing yourself rendered as a 3D avatar. Those type of things are interesting, and kind of leverage your own personality into the game that you feel a strong connection to. Like if you look at some of the more successful games like The Sims, right? Why do people go back there? Because you kind of render that real life experience into the virtual world. And I think that's a real key here, is really putting your own personality into the game, whether it's socially chatting with your friends in a very baseline integration, or going above and beyond in like the metaverse gaming space, and rendering yourself as the avatar you're playing as, and living your ideal life, or and doing whatever you can to do. So I think that's where you see a lot of in-app purchases come into play, and that's why people spend money dressing their avatars or getting new skins or all that stuff, because it's a way to keep users engaged and create a bond with that character or that avatar, right? So I think that really has a huge role to play, especially in the multiplayer space.
From my perspective, we've really just, I've started doing a lot of market research to figure out what problems we can solve, because we're in sort of a unique space. And so figuring out it's a lot like what Sid was talking about, these social aspects of it. Our biggest problems for players are being able to coordinate their games. These are usually 4 to 5 hour sessions. And so how do we help solve the calendar issue for them? And it might be as simple as just integrating Google Calendars or something like that. And there's some really basic things that as the company has grown up and become more established, there's so many things we can go and fine tune. And similarly to dressing avatars and doing all that, buying custom art, we've really encouraged a lot of like basic illustrators, like early in their career illustrators, to put map packs and art packs up for sale. So we have a very system agnostic system for our marketplace, and people invest in those illustrators and build out their games really beautifully. And once they've done that, they don't, they have love for it. They don't want to move.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to basically the exact same thing everyone else is saying, my company's mission statement is we build communities, and we like to build these games that have lots of emergent behavior in them, and where people can sort of socialize and be themselves. Even a game that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, like Partner in My Dorm, has really pivoted to a focus on inclusivity and diversity, and celebrating the wildly different ways people can be, right? And it's wonderful, and it's turned into, call it a really supportive environment for a lot of players who don't necessarily find that in real life. And so when games in general is a very human thing, being part of a community is a very human thing, and I think that's something that we it's really just part of our nature. It's something that we want to do, and because of that, we're just going to call it retain, right?
But I think it's all about listening to the players, right? If you listen hard enough to the players, they'll tell you how to get good retention. I play Scrabble Go every day with my pal, and retention's not a problem there, because I'm losing at the minute and trying to beat him.
Well, good luck with that. I'm sure there's people at the conference who could help you. So a question from the chat. Does it make sense to develop 2 funnels of user acquisition? One focusing on acquiring high-value users with AEO campaigns to whom we don't show ads and they're monetized through IAP, and another where the funnel is focused on volume, acquiring cheap users that are primarily monetized through ads. And have you ever tried something like this?
We have, and with mixed results. So in general, my growth team will have a blend of different players that they're targeting. Some of them are high value users, and some of them might be lower value users. In general, though, they look to make sure that the aggregate blend meets some defined ROAS goal that we have. And that mix is always changing. And it's not always changing by design, because the UA market is also always changing.
Cool. Anyone else? If not, I can move on to the next question.
I definitely target different segments of players just because it's such a different space between the GMs and the people who are joining for free and are not comfortable enough GMing. But yeah, I have very different messaging for those different cohorts of people.
Got it. Okay. Kenshi, you've been named in this next one. Can you talk a bit more about sensitivity analysis and how this gave insights for the development of Party in My Dorm?
Sure. So to be clear, while we are using it for all of our games, we are currently using sensitivity analysis more for Kingdoms of Heckfire. But sensitivity analysis is sort of trying to get a broad understanding of how all of the, call it variables, interrelate with each other or correlate with each other. So, you look at new users, retained users, you look at monetization, like all the different aspects of monetization. You might look at different aspects of retention, and you eventually then want to tie it into, like your feature roadmap or even like your normal roadmap. And so one of the things that, and in general, it gives the leadership team, and I know I'm like really glossing over a lot here, but I know it gives the leadership team a really good high-level understanding in terms of how different swaths of the game impact each other and how different parts of the community impact each other. And it allows them to make changes to the game. People talk about A/B testing. They talk about, making sure that you can test the impact of your changes to the game. Well, this is sort of goes hand in hand with that. In addition to A/B testing, the sensitivity analysis lets you step back from every change and make sure that nothing else was impacted, or at least gives you an idea of how other things were impacted, especially as that model is updated in real time. And so things that it's helped with, well, I would say that Party in My Dorm's retention over the last year has had pretty significant growth in the double-digit percentage, which is like really insane for a game that's, call it 11 years old now. And it also allowed us to see, for example, a lot of people say, okay, to fix retention, look at your funnel, look at your tutorial. And paradoxically, in Kingdoms of Heckfire, we noticed that fixing the tutorial really had no long-term impact on retention. And it was because of things like sensitivity analysis and having a growth model that the team was able to look at things like conservation of intent, which was coined by Andrew Chen, which is, if a player has an intent to play, they're going to forgive things like a bad tutorial, right? Instead, what you want to focus on are things that help players with a high concert, like that have a high intent to play. So, reducing loading times, making customer support easier for them. A lot of non-intuitive features that you think wouldn't really impact things, but for the players who really, really want to play are really important to them. And so, yeah, that's my long rambling answer to that question. I hope it answered the question.
I think so. Really interesting. Cool. We've got a couple of minutes left. We'll try and fit in a couple more questions. So which retention should we track? 24-hour windows or strict calendar dates? Pros and cons.
Take different views of retention, and all views of retention, I think, is one of the things that we do. The thing that's best is to get comparisons. I think one of the struggles with studios have is they live in their own world. So being able to understand where you're sitting compared to the market and your competitors is important. So lean on your third-party suppliers to give you those stats so you know where you're aiming for.
Cool. All right, I think we actually better wrap up since the next panel will need to get ready, and Rick has re-emerged.
Hello. Actually, we still have about 10 minutes left until the next panel starts. So we do have some time for more questions, but I'll happily jump in and take over on that front.
I can carry on asking questions, not a problem. Yeah, like let's carry on then. So, question in general, is retention higher on iOS?
Yes.
And why would that be?
Well, it depends. I think if you segment players by device type, we found that players on Android who are using the higher end devices have similar retention profiles to that of the players on iOS. But if you take Android in aggregate, which has a much wider pool of devices, some of which do not perform as well, some of which are non-standard, then yes, Android will have lower retention.
Yeah, and we see the same in terms of session times, right? So I think really it's the matter of not just the high-end device. I think it's just the limitation, right? The battery power, the consumption, CPU overheating, all of the things that could go wrong on, the lower-end Android devices do go wrong, especially for the heavier games. So you're not going to see those large session times with the lower-end Android devices. And we see the same thing from our customers in the gaming space. iOS is definitely heavy with the subset of, the Galaxies of the world, the Nexuses of the world, and they're comparable, but most Android devices have much, much shorter retention times.
It's interesting. We've been optimizing for less like gamer setup computers, just so we can get lower level players buying in, because there's so many more casual tabletop players now. So like some of our advanced features, we've been optimizing for people who, just don't have the capacity for some of the other features. And I hadn't really thought about it in comparison to apps, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we also optimize for, we test on over like 5,000 devices, but still, and it's super optimized, but I just think that with everything that's running in the background of their phone, and it's not, they're not just running your game, right, or any game. So I think really that's where it comes into play, is you do see a decline in the lower end devices, which is unfortunate, but I think that's why you have to optimize your experience for a subset of devices and run with that.
Got it. Do you think that the size of the app stores also has something to do with it? Because obviously, like iOS is, I would say, a more policed and refined catalog, and the Play Store tends to accept the vast majority of stuff. Do you think that could also be a factor in maybe players moving on more quickly from game to game?
Could be. Honestly, I don't have much metrics around that to support my claim, but I really think it's a combination of just the vast majority on the Play Store, but really the device limitations, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have based this on absolutely no data, but I don't think that makes a difference. Like, we're human, right? So we can keep in our minds, call it 3 to 7 things at a time. We only play a set amount of apps or games at a time. So do I care if the App Store has 1 billion apps and the Android store has 10 billion apps? I'm still going to be overwhelmed in either case.
Fair enough. All right. And then let's do one last question. Some tips for push notifications, messaging, timing, and impact. How can this help retention?
My most important thing here is them actually having value. I mean, that's really the first thing I think about every time we're sending a message to a customer, whether it's through email or notifications. Who are we talking to, and does it have value, and does the data support that? I always just go back to the very basic foundation of that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many games, apps I've uninstalled because of just a plethora of in-app purchases, or in terms of push notifications coming through, right, that don't add any value, right? I think if you have something on sale in terms of the in-app purchase store, or if you have a friend that's online, those are really the key drivers, especially, and I think based on Kenshi and Mark's point earlier, right, you have to understand your user, right? You don't want to be sending tremendous amount of messages in terms of in-app purchases to someone who never has made an in-app purchase before, right? Maybe just a friendly ping here and there, but really the community aspect is where I think it comes into play. If you see a friend online, you're more likely to jump in, right? So back to Amber's point, right? It's really around what value are you providing to the end user on this push notification? Is it really worth their time, or is it going to result in an uninstall?
Yeah, I would say, once you have a really good, everything's going to be different. Like the context, like the optimal push notification strategy is going to differ per game. And the way that you get around that is have a really good understanding of your players. However, I would say maybe a good place to start is to look into forgetting curves. Forgetting curves is, it's basically like this hypothesis where they hypothesize the decline of memory retention in time. And the curve typically shows how information is lost over time when there's no attempt to retain it. And so if you're starting somewhere and you think you already have a good value prop for messaging your players, take a look at your average, or take a look at some of the data on forgetting curves and place your at least your major push notifications right before the steepest declines in that curve.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of say Kenshi's point another way, you've only got a certain number of contacts available with individual players. And so understanding based on your CRM push strategy, which players are over contacted and actually under contacted as well is the starting point. Because if you start to rein in the extremes, you'll get to a better sort of player management strategy overall. The other thing I would say is that if you're reacting to churn with push notification after the fact, that is less good in terms of outcomes than actually having it part of a coherent strategy, which includes in-game messaging and then out-of-game messaging with the message flow joined up based on evidence on how players are interacting with the game, and then what you need to message to them to get the back. What are the features that they like? What has their player experience been? Empathizing with the player in terms of their experiences is a really great way of getting players back to try again.
Awesome. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We went a bit over time, so I hope people feel like they got additional value.
Ironically, actually, we're still a little bit under time, so
seriously,
I do have a quick. So I do actually have a quick question that I'd like to throw out of my own, because I know we've been kind of talking a lot in sort of like general overtones of like how developers can get retention, that kind of stuff. I'm kind of interested in, are there any games that anybody in the panel have been playing or have seen that you think have really nailed retention? I know Mark was saying that Scrabble Go is really grabbing him, and Kenshi, Hard Mode, any games that aren't ones that you've made?
Yes, I really like Ava's Manor, which is a solitaire/narrative game that was recently soft launched in Canada.
Cool.
I mean, I have a very shameful answer to this, which is throughout my recent pregnancy, I played Toy Blast nonstop and gave them a lot of money. But also I've spent a lot of money playing Hearthstone too. I think they do a good job.
I lost a lot of hours to Toon Blast, so there's no worries here. No judgment here. Anybody else? Mark or Sid?
I think We Are Here together is a really good game that's been around for quite some time now, years on years, and they still have a very good core fan base and user base who plays the game actively. And I recently started playing myself with some friends, so it's a pretty cool game. And then that's one of the ones that nailed it. They've been around for years now.
Being from Scotland and golf is compulsory here, me and my pals in lockdown adopted Golf Clash, rather than actual proper physical golf. And we had great fun in that game, competing against each other and others. It's a great experience.
And Nick, you've been asking all the questions, so you get to answer one. Are there any games that you've spotted that you've been enjoying and have really good retention?
I mean, my kind of default answer on this kind of question is always Marvel Strike Force. For me, it's like having this balance of kind of simple enough core gameplay and then just very deep meta, where you can really invest tons of hours even in just kind of upgrading and optimizing your deck. Basically, that's the biggest time sink for me, I think.
While we're all confessing our sins, I've got really into Pokemon Cafe Mix. I'm actually like one of the top players in the world at it, and also possibly one of the top spenders. So you know, it could be a lot worse than Toy Blast, at least. We're still waiting for our next speaker to join us, but I guess for now, I can just ramble for a bit. I'll allow all of you to disappear and just say thank you very much for the panel and for joining us, and thank you again for Nick for hosting. It was really interesting and great insights, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And thank you everyone for asking questions. So yes,
thanks everyone.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
everybody.
us. Take care.
Thank you.